May 1940. German forces control the heart of Europe. Poland fell in weeks. France collapsed in 40 days. The British army fled into the sea at Dunkirk. Germany looked unstoppable. 5 years later, Berlin is a field of ruins. The German army no longer exists. The high command is dead by suicide or execution. The nation is carved into occupation zones. What happened between these 2 points in time? At first glance, a military collapse, but in reality, a self-inflicted disaster. It was not bad luck. It was not simply superior enemy tactics. It was not the atomic bomb, which never touched European soil. This was systematic strategic incompetence. It occurred on a scale the world had never seen before. Between 1940 and 1945, a chain of decisions emerged. Each choice was worse than the previous one. These actions turned a position of strength into a total catastrophe. The records show a clear pattern. The most powerful military machine in history destroyed itself from within. This did not happen through simple battlefield losses. It happened through 10 specific strategic blunders. These errors were so profound that defeat became mathematically certain. Why did the leadership fail? They had the resources and the technology, but arrogance clouded their judgment. These were not random mistakes. They were connected. Each blunder triggered the next. Each failure weakened Germany's position for the next move. By 1943, the regime was locked into a trajectory. It could only end in one way. The question is not whether Germany lost. The question is different. Could they have won if just one of these decisions had been changed? The facts suggest a chilling possibility. There was no turning back. June 1940. France signed the surrender. The British army fled at Dunkirk, leaving thousands of vehicles and heavy guns abandoned on the sand. Britain stood alone. Germany controlled the entire European coastline from Norway to Spain. The Wehrmacht was the most powerful land force on Earth. The Luftwaffe outnumbered the Royal Air Force in total aircraft, but the advantage was smaller than it appeared. German Bf 109 fighters had a limited range. They could stay over British soil for only 20 minutes before the fuel needles hit red. Meanwhile, British factories worked 24 hours a day. They produced new Spitfires and Hurricanes faster than Germany could shoot them down. This was the moment. And yet, Germany waited. Why didn't Germany invade when Britain was at its weakest? It seemed the path was clear, but fear of the Royal Navy was stronger than the desire for victory. The answer reveals a fundamental flaw in the German military. It was a weakness that would eventually cost them the entire war. At first glance, an unstoppable machine. But in reality, a continental power with no sea legs. Events accelerated. You need to understand how close Britain came to disaster. The plan for the invasion had a name: Operation Sea Lion. Adolf Hitler signed Directive No. 16 on July 16, 1940. The German High Command scheduled the landings for September. The footage from the time shows massive barges being gathered in French ports. The sound of heavy crane engines filled the air. But the plan relied on 3 rigid conditions. All 3 had to be met simultaneously. First, complete air superiority over the English Channel. Second, naval superiority to protect the slow-moving invasion fleet from British destroyers. Third, heavy artillery batteries controlling the Dover-Calais Strait. There was no room for error. Failure in one meant the destruction of the entire German army. The clock began to tick. July 10, 1940. The Luftwaffe launched the first waves. Hundreds of German bombers targeted British airfields with one goal: destroy the Royal Air Force on the ground. They failed. The RAF did not break. Instead, something unexpected happened. Why did the British get stronger as the weeks passed? It seemed impossible under constant bombardment, but the reality was simple. British industry outperformed German intelligence. Factories worked 24 hours a day. They built replacement Spitfires and Hurricanes faster than the Germans could shoot them down. American crates arrived at the docks. Experienced pilots from Poland, Czechoslovakia, and the Commonwealth joined the squadrons. By September, the Luftwaffe had lost the battle for air superiority. The invasion was postponed once, then it was postponed again. Germany made a choice that changed the course of history. They didn't surrender. They didn't even officially cancel the operation. In the records, the plan simply faded away. By late 1940, the German High Command was looking east. Here is the fact most people miss. The failure wasn't just about the dogfights in the sky. The problem was deep inside the German military system. The Army, the Navy, and the Air Force could not agree on a single plan. They were rivals, not allies. The Kriegsmarine was a coastal force. It had no experience with massive amphibious landings. Their invasion fleet was a desperate collection of river barges, tugboats, and converted merchant ships. It was not a navy, it was a makeshift flotilla. The footage shows the chaos, 3 different branches planning 3 different invasions. They lacked the coordination, they lacked the specialized landing craft. They fundamentally misunderstood the scale of the English Channel. Britain survived. That single fact ensured Germany would lose the war. Every month, Britain stayed in the fight. The situation for Berlin worsened. 3 things happened simultaneously. American supplies poured into British ports by the ton. British factories reached peak production. Most importantly, the island became a permanent fortress for the Allies. The sound of engines filled the air. In 1943, American bombers used British airfields to turn German cities into rubble. In 1944, the D-Day landings launched from British shores. If Germany had to defend France, it was because Britain provided the springboard. But Hitler's leadership ignored these warnings in the summer of 1940. They were looking at maps of the East. They were preparing for a move so catastrophic it would end the Third Reich. The decision was made. They would invade the largest country on Earth while Britain was still standing. The plan was Operation Barbarossa, June 22, 1941. 3:15 in the morning. 3 million German soldiers crossed the Soviet border. This is the largest military invasion in human history. The German High Command makes a prediction. They estimate the war will last 6 to 8 weeks. Adolf Hitler issues a public statement. He says they only need to kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down. They were wrong. The scale of the error was catastrophic. It changed the course of civilization. Why did the German leadership ignore the facts? It was the moment political ideology completely overrode strategic reality. The proof is hidden in the invasion plan itself. The German General Staff calculated the numbers. They knew the Soviet Union had massive manpower reserves. Their estimate was specific. They believed the Soviets could mobilize 2 million reserve troops over 6 months. The reality was different. The Soviets mobilized 4 million men in 10 days. The Germans were off by a factor of 12. But the logistics were even worse. German supply officers issued a formal warning. They stated their supply lines could not sustain an invasion deeper than 300 miles. The distance from the border to Moscow was over 600 miles. Professional military planners looked at the data. They called the mission impossible. The invasion proceeded anyway. Why? The entire plan rested on ideological assumptions. They believed the Soviet state was a house of cards. They believed the Slavic population was inferior. They believed the Soviet leadership was incompetent. Every single assumption was false. The footage from the front shows the result. German tanks stall in the mud. Soldiers shiver in thin summer uniforms. The invasion began in June. By December, German forces reached the outskirts of Moscow. They were freezing. They were undersupplied. They were exhausted. The quick victory never came. The Soviet government did not collapse. Joseph Stalin did not flee the capital. Instead, the Soviet military launched a massive counterattack. Germany was now trapped. They were fighting on 2 fronts. Britain held the west. The Soviet Union pushed from the east. This violated every strategic principle in military history. You do not open a second front before finishing the first. Germany did it anyway. They ignored the maps and the math. Then, 5 months later, they made a move even more inexplicable. By December 1941, Germany was already facing a disaster on 2 fronts. But the situation was about to get much worse. December 11, 1941. On this day, Germany made a decision that remains a mystery to military historians. They declared war on the United States. It was a voluntary act. Why did they do it? Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor. Many assumed Germany was forced to act. This is incorrect. The reality reveals one of the most significant intelligence failures in history. December 7, 1941. Japan strikes the Pacific Fleet. The next day, the United States declares war on Japan. Germany had a treaty with Japan called the Tripartite Pact. It was a defensive alliance. Article 3 was clear. Germany must provide aid only if Japan was attacked. But Japan was the aggressor. Germany had a legal exit. They could have stayed out of the conflict. 4 days later, Germany declared war anyway. The industrial math was catastrophic. The United States possessed the largest economy on the planet. American factories were capable of outproducing Germany by 4-1. Germany had no physical way to strike back. Their navy could not cross the Atlantic in force. Their air force lacked the range to reach Washington or New York. No German soldier could set foot on North American soil. But the United States could reach Germany. American bombers could reach Berlin. American ships could sustain the British war effort. American troops could land on the European coast. The strategic reality was lopsided. Germany declared war on a target they could not reach, but who could certainly reach them? Why did the German leadership take this risk? At first glance, it looks like madness, but in reality, it was a lack of information. The Germans were missing a vital piece of the puzzle. 9 months earlier, in March 1941, American and British officials met in secret. These were the ABC-1 conferences in Washington. They had already drafted a blueprint. The plan was simple. If the United States entered the conflict, the primary goal was the defeat of Germany first. Europe was the priority. The Pacific was secondary. The entire weight of the American industrial machine would be aimed directly at Berlin. This was not a hypothetical idea. It was a signed strategic framework. Events accelerated. By declaring war in December, Germany did not just invite a new enemy. They triggered a pre-existing trap designed for their own destruction. The reaction in Washington was immediate. Within hours, the United States Congress gathered. The Senate vote was 88-0. The House of Representatives voted 393-0. There was not a single dissenting voice. Germany's declaration achieved what the American government could not do alone. It destroyed all domestic opposition. It unified the entire American public behind the war effort in a single afternoon. There was no turning back. Germany was now at war with Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States simultaneously. The trap was closed. June 22, 1941. German intelligence insisted the Soviet interior was a void. They were wrong. Something was happening deep in the east that Berlin deemed impossible. This event explains why Germany lost the Eastern Front before the first decisive battle began. It was the largest industrial evacuation in human history. As German tanks crossed the border, Soviet workers began disassembling entire industrial sectors. They didn't just pack tools. They dismantled buildings, crated machinery, and gathered every engineer and blue-collar worker. Archives and blueprints were loaded into crates. Everything moved hundreds or thousands of miles away. Take the Kharkov tank factory. This facility produced the T-34, the most effective tank in the Soviet arsenal. By late summer, German forces were closing in on the city. Soviet planners issued a single order: move the factory. They dismantled the assembly lines and loaded them onto freight trains. They moved everything 2,000 kilometers east to the Ural Mountains. The scale was massive. 30,000 workers boarded the trains. 10,000 heavy machine tools were bolted down to flatbeds. Alexander Morozov, the chief designer, personally directed the loading process. They worked while the sound of German artillery echoed in the distance. The Chelyabinsk Steel Works faced a similar challenge. This plant was the backbone of tank armor production. Planners gave the workers 75 days to relocate and resume operations. The workers finished the task in 56 days. How did they do it? They tore down a massive steel mill, transported it across a continent, and rebuilt it in under 2 months. Men and women worked 24 hours a day. They lived in thin tents on frozen ground during the Siberian winter. They laid miles of new railway tracks and reassembled 18 massive machine shops. They connected complex compressed air and electrical systems while temperatures dropped far below freezing. The result was a total industrial shift. By late 1941, these relocated plants were already pumping out aircraft and ammunition. The production gap was wide. In 1942, the Soviet Union manufactured 24,851 tanks. During that same period, Germany produced only 5,452. The Soviets built nearly 5 tanks for every one German vehicle. The pattern repeated across every sector. Soviet aircraft production was double the German rate. In artillery, small arms, and ammunition, the Soviets held the lead. German forces destroyed Soviet equipment on the battlefield, but they could not keep pace with their own losses. At first glance, the invasion was a German success, but in reality, the Soviet industrial machine was already outperforming the Reich. American military attachés in Moscow noticed the shift early. In late 1940 abuses and early 1941, they reported heavy machinery and thousands of skilled laborers moving east. The Soviets were preparing months before Operation Barbarossa began. They knew the invasion was coming. Germany was now fighting an opponent with superior production capacity and nearly unlimited manpower. But production alone does not win battles. The war was just beginning. 1942. This was the year the German High Command broke its own machine. While the Soviets learned to trust their generals, Germany did the opposite. The German military built its reputation on mission-based command. In German, Auftrags tactic. The concept was simple. A superior gave an objective. The subordinate figured out how to achieve it. No micromanagement, no interference from above. This system made the Wehrmacht unstoppable in 1939 and 1940. By 1942, that system was dead. How did this look on the ground? Summer 1942. German divisions are pushing toward Stalingrad and the Caucasus oil fields. The plan requires splitting the army between two massive objectives. Professional officers protest. They cite basic doctrine. A commander does not divide his strength during an offensive. The warning is ignored. The order remains: split the forces. It was a recurring pattern. December 1941. German troops are outside Moscow. The temperature drops to 40 below. The winter is brutal. Generals request a tactical withdrawal to defensive lines. They want to regroup and wait for spring. The response from headquarters is a single word: no. Hold every position, not one step back. What was the result? The footage shows frozen corpses piled in the snow. Thousands of soldiers died holding ground with zero strategic value. Engines cracked in the cold. Tanks were abandoned. Entire units were wiped out defending open fields. Professional judgment vanished. It was replaced by ideological determination. Did the Soviets follow the same path? At first, yes. In 1941, Stalin made the exact same errors. He banned retreats. He forced units to stay in death traps. Soviet casualties reached millions. But by 1943, Stalin changed his strategy. He stepped back. He began trusting his commanders. Marshal Georgy Zhukov and Alexander Vasilevsky received operational freedom. They moved divisions without waiting for a phone call from the Kremlin. Soviet planning became professional. Meanwhile, the German structure became rigid. It became a hierarchy of fear and dysfunction. The two systems crossed paths in the middle of the war. The professional German military became an ideological puppet. The ideological Soviet military became a professional killing machine. Why did this happen? Loyalty was now more important than competence. This refusal to trust military experts led directly to a catastrophe. It was a disaster so massive it destroyed the myth of German invincibility. An entire army was about to disappear. August 23, 1942. German tanks reach the banks of the Volga River. Ahead lies Stalingrad. The city carries the name of the Soviet leader. For Adolf Hitler, seizing it is a matter of prestige. It is a propaganda prize. But the map tells a different story. From a strategic view, the city is a secondary objective. The real target lies further south. Germany needs the oil fields of the Caucasus to keep its war machine moving. Without that fuel, the Wehrmacht stops. The battle begins. German forces enter the city streets. They are pulled into a meat grinder. It is house-to-house combat. It is room-to-room fighting. In these ruins, German advantages in tanks and aircraft vanish. Panzers cannot maneuver in the rubble. Snipers hide in the shadows of shattered factories. Months pass. The casualty lists grow longer. Hitler pours more divisions into the city. The symbolic victory becomes an obsession. It outweighs the strategic goal. Then, the tide turns. November the 19th, 1942. Operation Uranus begins. The Soviets do not attack the heart of the city. They target the flanks. These lines are held by Romanian and Italian units. These troops lack heavy anti-tank weapons. Their morale is low. The Soviet Red Army hits them with massive armored columns. The flanks shatter. Soviet tanks drive deep into the rear. On November 23rd, the two Soviet pincers meet west of the city. The trap snaps shut. 300,000 German and Axis soldiers are cut off. They are trapped in a pocket called the Kessel. The footage from those days shows a desperate situation. General Friedrich Paulus, commander of the 6th Army, sends a message to headquarters. He is blunt. He demands a breakout. Escape routes are still open for a few hours. If the army moves now, it survives. If it stays, it dies. The response arrives from Hitler's headquarters. It is a direct order. Stand fast. Do not retreat. Hold Stalingrad at any cost. Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring makes a promise. He tells Hitler the Luftwaffe can supply the army by air. He claims they can fly in 500 tons of food and ammunition every day. But the math does not work. The 6th Army needs 700 tons daily just to function. The Luftwaffe is not capable of the task. They manage an average of only 117 tons per day. In the frame, skeletal soldiers and empty crates. By December, the situation is catastrophic. Horses are slaughtered for meat, then the horses are gone. Bread rations drop to a few grams. Medical supplies vanish. The temperature plunges to -40 degrees. Frostbite claims more limbs than bullets. January 1943. The Soviets launch the final assault. They squeeze the pocket. On February 2, 1943, the fighting stops. General Paulus surrenders. 91,000 German soldiers emerge from the cellars. They are walking ghosts. They begin the long march into Soviet captivity. But the disaster was only beginning for these men. Of those 91,000 prisoners, only 5,000 to 6,000 ever saw Germany again. That is a survival rate of roughly 5%. The rest disappeared. They died of typhus. They died of starvation. They died during forced labor in the gulags of Siberia. The 6th Army ceased to exist. 800,000 men. That was the total Axis body count. Dead, wounded, missing, or taken prisoner. On the ground in and around Stalingrad, Soviet recovery teams gathered 250,000 Axis corpses. The scale of the carnage was unprecedented. Soviet casualties were even higher, exceeding 1 million soldiers. 40,000 civilians perished in the ruins. But a cold strategic reality sat behind the numbers. The Soviet Union could replace its losses. Germany could not. Stalingrad was not an isolated error. It was a blueprint for failure. The specific order that destroyed the 6th Army, to hold at all costs and never retreat, became a recurring theme. This directive was repeated across the entire Eastern Front. It created pocket after pocket. It led to disaster after disaster. Why did the German High Command abandon its own logic? The question is simple. The answer lies in a dangerous obsession with ground over men. Standard military doctrine is clear. A commander holds vital positions, trades territory for time when necessary, and preserves forces for a counterattack. A commander does not waste elite troops defending positions that are impossible to hold. By 1943, Germany was doing the exact opposite. Tut Korsen, January to February 1944. The footage shows the same pattern as Stalingrad. German forces were encircled. 60,000 troops were trapped in the mud. This happened again and again. Demyansk, Holm, Velikie Luki. In every instance, the orders from Berlin were identical: hold fast, no retreat. The Soviet Red Army responded with a consistent tactic. They bypassed the strong points, encircled the position, and destroyed it. A tragic irony fueled this cycle. Hitler issued these no-retreat orders because of a single past success, the Demiansk Pocket, February to April 1942. 100,000 German troops were surrounded. During those months, the Luftwaffe managed to supply the garrison by air. Eventually, those troops broke out. The gamble worked. 8 months later, the trap closed around Stalingrad. Hermann Göring made a promise. He claimed he could repeat the victory scene at Demiansk. But he ignored the physical facts. Demiansk involved 100,000 men. Stalingrad involved 300,000. The supply requirements were 3 times higher. The distance for the transport planes was longer. The winter weather was significantly worse. The successful airlift at Demiansk created a fatal precedent. It made the impossible situation at Stalingrad look viable on paper. In reality, it was a death sentence. Germany was now losing entire armies to maintain a strategy based on a fluke. The Eastern Front was no longer a war of maneuver. It was a series of self-inflicted traps. 60 divisions in France and the Low Countries, 150 divisions in Russia, 20 divisions in Italy, thousands more men scattered across Norway, Denmark, and the Balkans. The German military is stretched thin across an entire continent. These forces are isolated. They cannot support each other. Units in France are pinned down by the threat of invasion. Divisions in Italy are trapped in the mountains. None of them can help the Eastern Front. The Allies hold the initiative. They choose the time and place of the strike. The German High Command is forced to guess. Where will the main blow fall? At first glance, a strong defense. But in reality, a house of cards. The generals make a fatal mistake. They expect the primary Soviet offensive of 1944 to hit the south. They believe the target is Army Group North Ukraine. To prepare, they begin stripping Army Group Center in Belorussia of its strength. They move the pieces across the map. 1/3 of the artillery is gone. Half of the tank destroyers are sent south. 88% of the tanks are loaded onto trains and moved away. Army Group Center is now a hollow shell. The infantry waits in trenches without armored support. The bunkers are manned by aging reservists and depleted units. There is no mobile reserve left to plug the gaps. Why did the German High Command ignore the warnings? Their intelligence reports suggested a buildup in the center, but Hitler and his staff remained obsessed with the southern oil fields. It was a strategic blindness that changed the course of history. June 22, 1944, 3 years to the day after the invasion of the Soviet Union. Operation Bagration begins. The Soviet Red Army strikes exactly where the German line is weakest. Thousands of heavy guns open fire at once. The footage shows the horizon turns into a wall of flame. This is not a simple breakthrough. It is a total disintegration. The Soviet forces bypass strong points and encircle entire divisions. The German soldiers have nowhere to retreat. They are trapped in the forests and marshes of Belorussia. Within days, an entire army group ceases to exist. It is the worst German defeat of the entire war. In terms of raw numbers and material lost, it surpasses the catastrophe at Stalingrad. 28 divisions are wiped off the map. 300,000 men are killed, wounded, or captured. The cause was simple. Germany tried to defend every border simultaneously. By trying to be strong everywhere, they became strong nowhere. Events accelerated. By late 1944, the situation turned from a retreat into a collapse. Germany was losing the war of production. The factories in the Ruhr were burning. The sky belonged to the Allied bombers. The end was now inevitable. 1943. The German High Command realizes the industrial war is lost. They abandon conventional production to chase a technological miracle. They call them wonder weapons. These machines are designed to rewrite the rules of combat. It fails. Late 1943. German engineers work in secret bunkers and underground factories. They develop jet aircraft, ballistic missiles, and heavy tanks. Some designs are decades ahead of their time. The Messerschmitt Me 262 jet fighter flies faster than any Allied plane. The V-2 rocket becomes the first long-range ballistic missile in history. What was the problem? Germany did not need miracles. They needed a massive supply of weapons that already worked. Look at the Messerschmitt Me-262. During its first major engagement, 5 Me-262s intercepted American bomber formations. The jets moved so fast the escort fighters could not react. The Germans scored 6 confirmed kills. They suffered 0 losses. In the frame, a silver streak passing through a cloud of smoke. The aircraft was a technological marvel. It was faster. It was better armed. It was superior to every Allied fighter in existence. But the numbers tell a different story. Germany manufactured 1,430 units. Only 300 ever reached the front lines. They never put more than 36 jets in the air at the same time. 36 aircraft. They faced Allied bomber fleets of 2,000 planes. The raids happened daily. The discrepancy was total. Why was the number so low? A bottleneck existed, the Junkers Jumo 004 jet engine. The technology was catastrophically unreliable. The footage shows mechanics constantly dismantling the turbines. These engines required a complete overhaul every 10 to 25 hours of flight. Production required strategic materials, nickel, cobalt, molybdenum. Germany had none left. They used inferior substitute metals. The engines became even more prone to failure. Then came a strategic blunder. In mid-1943, leadership ordered the conversion of these fighters into bombers. This decision diverted 30% of production. It delayed the deployment of the fighter version by several months. It got worse. During a single Allied bombing raid, 60 Me-262s were vaporized on the ground. They never even started their engines. Then there was the V-2 rocket. This program was a financial black hole. Germany spent more than $2 billion on it. This exceeded 50% of the budget for the American Manhattan Project. The V-2 hit London. It caused civilian casualties, but it had 0 strategic impact on the military situation. Those resources were wasted. The same funds could have built thousands of conventional tanks and fighters. These were the tools that actually decided battles. By late 1943, the leadership knew the truth. They could not win a war of production against the Soviet Union and the United States. The wonder weapon strategy was a desperate gamble. They searched for a technological silver bullet to bypass their industrial deficit. They stopped trying to win the war of production. They tried to change the nature of war itself. They ran out of time. January 1945. The Red Army pushed from the east while Western allies advanced from the west. Allied bombers hit German cities 24 hours a day. Logic dictated one move: surrender. Instead, Germany fought for 6 more months. That single decision claimed more lives than any other period of the conflict. Why did the regime refuse to stop? By late 1944, every professional general reached the same conclusion: the war was lost. Strategic maps showed a tightening circle. Continuing the fight offered no hope of victory. It only guaranteed more fire and more corpses. The footage shows the result. Rubble replaced streets. Civilians huddled in basements while shells leveled their homes. Germany held out until May 1945. But what did those final 6 months actually achieve? At first glance, a desperate defense, but in reality, a massacre. The numbers tell the story. More German soldiers died in these months than in the previous years. More cities were erased from the map. More civilians burned in firestorms. Inside the concentration camps, thousands of prisoners died days before the liberators arrived. The delay was a death sentence for millions. Berlin became a graveyard in May 1945. The camera records the aftermath. Broken tanks and bodies lining the gutters. Brutal street fighting killed tens of thousands in the capital alone. The city turned into a wasteland of brick and dust. Soviet casualties were massive. German defenders died in the ruins of their own government buildings. None of this changed the final map. It moved no borders. It saved no lives. By 1945, military strategy was dead. It no longer guided German leadership. Hitler had already voiced his intent in 1942. He stated that if the German people could not win, they deserved to disappear. The choice to fight to the end was not a military tactic. It was the execution of a self-destructive ideology. The regime stopped seeking victory. It sought destruction. They called it Götterdämmerung, the twilight of the gods. It was an apocalyptic plan to drag the entire nation into the grave. The leadership intended for Germany to burn with them. Events accelerated toward the end. There was no turning back. The story of the Reich ended in a bunker beneath a city of ruins. This was the final cost of a regime that chose total annihilation over surrender. Thus ended the era. 10 strategic blunders. This is why Germany lost the Second World War. 1. The failure to invade Britain. Hitler paused after the fall of France. He gave the British military time to regroup. The island became a permanent Allied base. It served as an unsinkable aircraft carrier for the eventual invasion of Europe. 2. The invasion of the Soviet Union. This happened before Britain was defeated. It opened a two-front war. History shows this was unwinnable. German resources were split between the Atlantic and the East. 3. Declaring war on the United States. This added a third enemy. The Americans possessed unlimited industrial capacity. They could outproduce German factories by a factor of 10. 4. Underestimating Soviet production. Berlin assumed the Soviet economy would collapse. The opposite happened. Factories moved east. Production increased while German supplies dwindled. 5. Micromanaging the generals. Hitler replaced professional military judgment with ideological determination. He ignored the advice of his staff. He demanded fanaticism instead of logistics. 6. The Battle of Stalingrad. An entire army was lost for a symbolic goal. The city had little strategic value. Over 200,000 men were encircled and destroyed. 7. Refusing strategic retreats. Hitler forced units to hold worthless ground. He forbade tactical withdrawals. This led to the needless sacrifice of veteran divisions. 8. Dispersing forces. The military fought on too many fronts. They defended everywhere but were strong nowhere. Resources were spread from North Africa to the Arctic Circle. 9. Prioritizing wonder weapons. Resources went into rockets and jet fighters that were too few and too late. They ignored mass production of proven tanks and aircraft. 10. Fighting to the bitter end. The regime refused to surrender. This caused 6 months of pointless destruction. Millions died after the war was already lost. Notice what is missing from this list. Moral failures, war crimes. These were catastrophic atrocities, but this analysis focuses on pure strategic decision-making. A pattern emerges. Each mistake made the next one more likely. Each failure weakened Germany's position. By 1943, the trajectory was locked. Could Germany have won with different choices? Most military historians say no. The combined industrial power of Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States was too great. But a different argument exists. Some historians believe choices made in 1940 or 41 could have led to a negotiated peace. What if Britain had been invaded successfully? What if the Soviet Union was never attacked? We will never know. At first glance, the German military seemed invincible, but in reality, it was a hollow machine. The strategic decisions led directly to total defeat. Strategy matters. Professional judgment matters. Knowing when you are beaten matters most. In 1939, Germany had the most powerful military in the world. By 1945, it was gone. The footage from the era shows the result. Rubble, burnt-out tanks, lines of prisoners. This was not a lack of courage or inferior equipment. It was a systematic strategic failure. Which blunder was the most catastrophic? Was it the Eastern Front, the American entry, or the disaster at Stalingrad? If you could change one decision which would have the biggest impact, the story ends in the ruins of Berlin. Thus ended the era.